بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام وكفى بي على نعمة الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام وكفى بي على نعمة الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام وكفى بي على نعمة السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you very much for attending the session. So today's session is actually on how to do a book review. The thing that I didn't want to do is to do a PowerPoint by death. One of the things that I've learned over the years of teaching, this is my 15th year of teaching at the University of Huddersfield, is that people have a tendency to switch off when it comes to using PowerPoint slides. Whenever I have the opportunity to speak in public, I do try my best to avoid using PowerPoints and trying to make it much more interactive. How to do a book review. Now, it would have been nice if obviously if I had an idea of what your individual backgrounds are, but because this is being recorded for the general reader, I thought that I'd go through the structure and the sequence. Now, this is my own subjective viewpoint, and this is subjective in the sense that it's also informed by my experience as a reviews editor. So for the journal Critical Muslim, published by Hearst, and so I have a kind of window of interaction with various academics when it comes to writing reviews and also publishing reviews for a journal. Secondly, I've obviously reviewed, I don't know, many books over the years, both for academic journals, but also for non-academic journals as well. So, I have an idea of how to write journal articles. But also, I supervise a number of PhD students, and one of the things that I encourage them to do before they submit their PhD thesis is trying to get a journal article published before they go into the Viva, otherwise known as the PhD examination. Equally speaking, I have several master's students as well that I teach, and once again, I do encourage them also to start thinking about writing reviews. So writing reviews is obviously it's a good stepping stone to get into wider publishing as well. So some of the things that we encourage students to do is to try to get into the habit of writing reviews, because it really gets you seriously to read books, to think about books, but also trying to kind of summarize the key arguments and ideas within the text as well, and to put all those ideas down in paper. So writing review isn't an end in itself. That's the point that I'm trying to get across, but rather a means to an end, because there's so many benefits, spin-offs that you actually get when it comes to writing reviews. Now, having said that, writing reviews isn't only for a PhD student or early careers researcher who have just started to embark upon an academic career. When you read academic journals, you basically realize that fully established professors also write book reviews as well. So although it's a useful stepping stone for students, but fully fledged professors, emeritus professors, otherwise known as retired professors, also write book reviews. So an example in point is that the recent, hopefully the next edition of the book review, the next edition of the Critical Muslim will have a review of, I'm just trying to look at the book, it might be upstairs in my library. Where is it now? No, it's probably upstairs. Yeah. So we have Professor Iftikhar Malik, who's doing a review of Nigel Biggs's work. I don't know if you're familiar with Nigel Biggs. He's just written a book on colonialism. It's a revisionist take. So in other words, it's a book in praise of colonialism. So I'm very fortunate to have Iftikhar Malik, who's obviously a very famous Islamic historian, to write a review of that. So the point that I'm trying to get across is that you have, it's not just solely aimed for early career researchers, but also something that scholars also engage in serious writing. Okay, so that's just basically an introduction or a prelude. So what I'd like to do now is to go into 5 key points. So these are the 5 key points that I would really like to spend the next 40 minutes or so just going into some detail. So let me just list those five points, and then I can expand upon them. So the first point when it comes to reviewing a book is for you to know the book. So I mean, each book actually has a standing within a broader academic discourse or a broader academic debate. So it's important before you pick up any book is to know the nature of the book and how it sits in within the broader parameters of debate. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to have an end in sight as well. So in other words, if you're thinking of doing a review, you have to also know the journal that you ideally want to actually get your book review published in. And you may actually say, well, I'm not interested in getting my book review published in a journal, but I'm really interested in doing a review for my own website or someone else's website, for example. That's also fine as well, but it's really important to actually know the audience, but also the actual journal that you're aiming towards getting your book review published. The third point is what's the best way of structuring an article? I mean, there's different models in which that you can actually use as a way of writing a review. So I'll spend some time just looking at this structure. Now, the fourth point is once you've actually written the article, what do you do with it? Yeah. So the point that I'm trying to get across there is that it's the importance of editing and re-editing. Yeah. So that's the fourth point. And the fifth point is about how to handle rejections. You know, if you get your journal article published, that's fine. But also, I just want to kind of just get over the point about. So the first point is about knowing the text, knowing the book. Okay, so when you are interested in doing a book review, it's really important to know your text. So now, if you're a fully fledged academic, then the answer to this question is much more easier because you've spent your entire PhD journey reading, thinking, reviewing books. Because what you have to do for both a master's level study and also a PhD level study, if you're doing social science or humanities related subjects, is that you have to do a literature review. A literature review means that you have to read books and review books, but not individual books that you have to review, you know, sometimes, you know, hundreds of books. You know, you have to read the entire genre of the key texts, of the key classical texts. So if you're an academic, then the answer to this question is much more easy because you already know the parameters of the debate. Now, if you're a non-academic who's really thinking of writing and reviewing books, then this might need some time to think about. You know, in other words, which book that you have to you identify and which book that 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 you're thinking of reviewing. So in some of the subject areas, you will basically find that there are books that are aimed at the general audience, and there are books aimed at the specialist audience. So there is a hierarchy of books when that's available within the public domain. So let me just give you a quick example just to at least elucidate this point in some detail. So if I just pick up randomly two books on Ibn Khaldun. So the first book that I've actually just picked up is this. My camera is it there? We are. Yeah. So this is by a good friend of mine, Said Farid Al-Attas, and the title of the book is Ibn Khaldun, and it's part of the makers of the Islamic civilization. So now, if you pick up this book, now you were able to actually quickly know from the introduction that this is aimed at a general reader. Yeah. So this book is actually at a general reader. So in other words, that this book can be read and can be reviewed by anyone who's interested in Ibn Khaldun, or interested in Islamic scholarship, or interested in Islamic intellectual history. So this is aimed at a general audience. Now, there are other books as well that I could have actually mentioned. So, for example, the famous text by Imam al-Ghazali, Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin, that's also written for the general audience. It's aimed at the general masses, so to speak. So these books are easily and accessible to the general reader. Now, I've just picked up this other book, and once again, it's something that I've just picked up randomly off the shelf. And this is a book by the late Mohsin Mahdi. Mohsin spelled Muhsin, his surname spelled Mahdi. Now, if you know anything about Mohsin Mahdi, you will basically know that he is a famous philosopher who's written extensively on Islamic philosophy. Now, this is basically a book that's aimed at Ibn Khaldun's philosophy. Now, if you were to review this book, then the chances are that you have to have a very good understanding of Islamic philosophy, because he sees Ibn Khaldun through a philosophical lens. Not because Ibn Khaldun can be looked through the lens of philosophy, history, sociology, education, theology, etc. But this book very much looks at Ibn Khaldun from the point of view of philosophy. So it's very helpful if you know how and where this author is locating the actual the person, i.e. Ibn Khaldun. How is he basically locating it? Yep. Secondly, you have to have some understanding of Western philosophy as well, because one of the key arguments that Mohsin Mahdi is making in this book is basically saying that Ibn Khaldun comes from the particular worldview of Aristotle and Aristotelian philosophy. So if you have no idea about Aristotle and Aristotelian philosophy and how that permeates the Muslim world, then you can probably read the book, but it'll make the review impossible or very difficult for you to write, but also for you to actually convey the point to the readership. So the point that I'm trying to get across is that you have to know your text, but also you have to know how that text is actually positioned within the broader debate of the field that you are trying to cover. Yeah. So that's the point. Now, let me give you another example. So from this week's reading, I have two books. The first one is much more easy. You might be useful because it's very much kind of contemporary as well. So this is a book by Hill Aked, and the title of the book is Friends of Israel, the Backlash Against Palestine Solidarity. Yeah. So it's published by Verso Press. And by looking at the title, but also most important, the publisher, you're able to actually quickly locate how this book is going to be positioned. Yeah. So we know that Verso. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the publishers. Verso is a left-wing academic publishing house that does serious work around left-wing intellectual thought. So that's the history and the background of the publishers. This book, I think, is really timely and interesting because it speaks to the contemporary debates and politics around Israel and some of the lobby that that Israel basically uses as a way of influencing its foreign policy, both within the context of education, media, culture, politics, etc. It seems to me, I've just more or less I'm on the conclusion, so hopefully by the end of play today, I'll be able to actually finish it. It seems to be that it was his PhD thesis that's been recasted as as a book. It's solid. It's very stimulating. It's very contemporary. But most importantly, anybody who's interested in contemporary politics and knowing how the system basically operates will thoroughly enjoy this book. But most importantly, it's aimed at the general audience. That's the point that I'm trying to get across. Any individual who has basic understanding of policy on global politics and the UK politics will basically be able to actually pick this up and do a quick review. Yeah, and it's not that very detailed book. I mean, it's only how many pages is it? Just less than 300 pages. Extensive footnotes. If you're really interested in following up the articles, so if you're interested in following up some of the debates, you can do. But the point is that it's an interesting book that anyone can actually pick up and do a review. So this book, like other books that I've demonstrated, it's there for the general masses. Now here, this is it's a huge text. It's a biography of Max Weber. Max Weber is the the famous sociologist, along with Karl Marx, Emile Durkheim, and Max Weber is obviously another important figure. So this, I mean, it does require someone with a understanding of, say, sociology, but also an understanding of Max Weber's ideas in order to fully appreciate and read this biography. I'm really interested in Max Weber because amongst the three famous sociologists, he's the only one that basically engaged in Muslim societies and Islam, in a very detailed way. So that's the point. The point that I'm trying to get across is quite. I mean, it's an obvious one. So know your text. So when it comes to reviewing, you're able to actually write with some degree of authority. So that's the point about knowing your text and knowing the book. Now, the other thing that I would basically say associated with this is that I think everybody should have an area of their own expertise. It's important that if you I'm assuming that you're all students. So when you're embarking upon an academic or scholarly journey, it's really important to start off with having an expertise in one particular area. So if you're a young student, you start off by saying, okay, so what I'm interested in doing in spending the next 5 years just mastering one particular area. It's quite easy for you to actually develop a reading list and then just go through it systematically. So you at least you have an area of specialism, and you have an area of expertise. Now, having said that, if you follow the Muslim intellectual tradition, you will also note that we weren't experts in one particular domain. Muslim scholars of the past were polymaths. They had an expertise in cross sections of disciplines, but most importantly, disciplines were not necessarily sealed off in the same way that Western intellectual discourse is. So you go to a department of sociology, or you go to the department of history, you go to the department of politics, you go to a separate department when it comes to science. The way in which Islamic epistemology actually worked is they didn't necessarily have these disciplinary silos. So part of the problem that we basically have in the West is that because we have these disciplinary silos, is that the Department of Economics don't speak to the Department of Ethics. And now for Muslim academics or Muslim, thinkers, it's very impossible for us to kind of make that disconnect between ethics and business. Ethics and business go hand in glove. So that's also something that I guess we have to have I guess we have to be mindful of. Okay, so that's the first point. Do we have a question here? Just 1 second. Okay. Right. Okay. So I think that's a good a point. So if you can keep that question to the end, then at least we can at least get into some a degree of interaction. So you will find, inshallah, that I will try and answer that question in the next couple of points. So the second point is knowing the journal. Now, once again, there are different outlets when it comes to journals. I mean, I don't know. Some people might be interested in academic journals. Others might be actually interested in getting book reviews in magazines. Newspapers also accept book reviews. Websites also accept book reviews, and there's also specialist newspapers like the London Review of Books that I've been subscribing to for many years. Also do serious scholarly book reviews. So the second point is for you to actually know where you want to when to kind of house your review article, if you like. 1 second. So if it's straightforward academic publishers, you will find that there's different journals. So if you've said, for example, if you're a master's student or a PhD student, and you've just completed a book review and you want to get your book review published, and you're looking for a journal. The thing is that you've got different types of journal outlets out there. You've got journal that basically a specialist within certain intellectual certain intellectual perspectives. So, for example, within my field of sociology and sociology of race, you've got a very famous an important journal called the Journal of Race and Class. It's actually published by a sage, and they tend to publish journal articles on race and racism within British society. But most importantly, they have a particular angle when it comes to the study of race and racism. Yeah. So their angle is very much grounded within class struggle, based on the writings of, say, for example, Karl Marx and various other left-wing intellectuals. So if you've done a review and your review doesn't necessarily fit the intellectual worldview of that particular journal, then the chances are that your book review is not going to be published. Now, it's not going to get published because there is a form of deficit in your writing capability or the argument it's trying to make. There is so it's not your fault. It's the fault of you not necessarily recognizing that certain journal only publishes certain book reviews or articles that fit a certain intellectual worldview. So let me just give you a different example that might actually work. So, for example, for argument's sake, if you have a journal on Hanafi studies, I think there is a journal that was just recently published. So they might actually say, look, we're interested in Hanafi intellectual thought. Now, if you've really done a really interesting book review on Imam Malik's Mu'atta, they might not necessarily be interested in publishing it. I'm just hypothetically speaking. So the point that you have to bear in mind is when you've got your article written, you have to know the intellectual a position of that particular journal. In the same way, if you want to actually get your book review published in a magazine or a newspaper, you have to know their intellectual perspective. Like, so for example, The Guardian has a very much of a left-wing view when it comes to society. The Times, the Sunday Times, has a very right-wing view, of society. The Telegraph is also on the right, but there is a difference between the Times and the Telegraph. In the same way that, say, for example, the Independent, which is obviously online at the moment, or the newspaper, they also, take reviews of books. That's also on the left, but there is a difference between the Guardian and the So when I say you have to know the journal or the magazine, you have to basically know what particular angle are they interested in, yeah, and what particular books do they publish, yeah. If it's history, if it's biography, if it's politics, it's science, is it popular science? So it's really important for you to actually know what particular angle each of the journal basically, basically takes. So you can spare spare a lot of time by just doing some background reading. So one of the questions I think that was asked about what do you do when when you've sent an article and the editors are not necessarily getting back. Now that might be one or two of issues. So the first thing is that if you've basically sent a review of a book that's basically outside the ideological remit of that particular newspaper or a journal, then the chances are that the editor is going to say, well, if you've not been bothered to know what our intellectual stances are, then it doesn't necessarily merit a response. Now, the point that I'm trying to get across there is that it's important for you to know the ideological stance that journal, that paper, that magazine, the website basically takes. Yeah. So there's no point sending a pro-Palestinian review of a book to a newspaper which is very sympathetic for the state of Israel, say, for example. Yeah. So that's really important for you to know, the what's it called now? The intellectual position that takes. Okay, so that's my second point. How are we doing for time? Okay. Right. So okay, so the third point. So we're moving on to the third point, and this point is to do with the structure of the article, and this might actually answer the question that was just posted in the in the chat. So there's different ways in which you can actually do reviews. So, for example, if you pick up a copy right here, might be upstairs probably. It's the journal, the Muslim World Book Review. Yeah, so that Muslim World Book Review is published by, the Markfield Centre over in Leicester, and it's been publishing book reviews for God knows how, back in the 1980s, I think it started. Now, if you read some of the reviews there, you will find that several individuals' approach when it comes to writing book reviews is they read the book. Once they've read the book, they basically go through it linearly. Yeah, the introduction says this, chapter 1 said this, chapter 2 said this, chapter 3 said this, and chapter 4 said this, and the conclusion argued that, and that's the review. Now, that in my opinion is a very perhaps, I mean, yeah, let me be a bit harsh here. It's a bit a lazy way of doing a review. A book review isn't necessarily just going through a chapter and chapter. A book review is basically when you've read the book, when you've made extensive notes within the book, and you take a step back, and then you're basically trying to summarize the arguments of the book. What are the key points that this book is trying to basically make? Yeah. What are the kind of the strengths and the merits of the arguments that's that the person is basically making? How does that book situate itself within the broad genre of that particular field? So I guess what the point of the review isn't necessarily to give you a point-by-point summary of the book, but rather it's there to actually give you a summary of the central a thesis, the central argument that is trying to the author is trying to kind of articulate. You can be critical. I mean, that's encouraged. You can be quite sympathetic. So, for example, if you're reviewing a book on your by your favorite author, say, for example, and if you can't necessarily find any faults, it's fine for you to be quite sympathetic in the in the actual review itself. So it's trying to kind of do a different type of review. Now, the review that I prefer is basically when you say to yourself, okay, so I'm going to do a review of, say, for example, any book. Yeah. So randomly, if I'm interested in doing the review of Max Weber's the biography of Max Weber, what I would basically do is read other books around that particular area. Yep. So I will basically try to kind of articulate how this book is actually positioned in relation to other biographies that's basically written by Max Weber as well. So essentially what you're basically doing is much more intellectual, heavy lifting. It's not just one book that you're actually reviewing. You're reviewing that particular book, but you've read other several books around that particular discipline in order for you to actually locate this particular book in that broader intellectual debate and intellectual, intellectual discourse. So that's the other point. So you're kind of weaving in various different arguments, different debates, and you're making the review much more intellectually much more subtle, intellectually more grounding, and you're actually making it much more richer. You're trying to give a much more richer perspective and richer picture to the actual audience. And this is one of the things that I really enjoy. I mean, the London Review of Books is not just one. There's various other. There's the New York Review of Books as well. I mean, there's various other publishing houses that basically just do reviews. But the thing that these reviews basically do, they take the book, they might actually take 3 or 4 books and then try to do a summary of that particular, of that particular kind of area of study. I mean, this is the most recent copy, and if you're really interested in, once again, the recent debates around Israel, Pankaj Mishra, the famous, the Indian historian and intellectual, he does a fantastic review of a couple of books around Germany, and it's basically a support for Israel. Uh, so I mean, there's it's a really interesting way of reading how other people, the industry standard, what is the best way of basically doing it. So the more reviews of the books that you basically read, the more what's the word now? The more a you'll have more strength of that particular subject matter. Say, for example, yeah. So it's a bit like, if you're interested in, say, for example, I don't necessarily like football, but let me just give you a football analogy. If you want to play football, you have to watch other people play football as well, really, isn't it? I mean, that's the point. I mean, if you're interested in, I don't know, um, martial arts, say, for example. My son's really into Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So, he spends a lot of time watching people do, you know, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So if you're interested in becoming a writer, you have to be a serious reader, but also you have to be a serious a follower of the industry, industry the benchmark, so to speak. So if you're really interested in, I don't know, the history, then you have to really get an understanding of how reviews of history books are actually done. So when it comes to reviewing history books, it's a different style of writing reviews of, say, biographies or science fiction. So that's an important lesson that I think that it'll serve everybody well. If you get into the style of how history reviews are actually done, say compared to, say, for example, travel writing. Doing a travel review of books. Well, say, for example, if I were doing a review of Australia, you'd think that A, you would have actually visited the country, B, that you would have actually known the key styles of writing, when it comes to travel literatures of that particular part of the world, etc. So being immersing yourself in that kind of a field is I think it's really really important. Okay, so that's my third point. So okay, let's get to the fourth point. Now the fourth point is, when it comes to finishing the the article. So once you've read the book, you've read other books around that particular area, you've basically identified your own style of writing reviews, and that's basically been influenced by the industry standards of reviewing journal articles or articles, say, for example, for newspapers. What do you do afterwards? And the thing is that a lot of my students basically, what they do, they sit down, they read the book, they write a review of the book, or even an essay, say, for example, and then they, it's print and submit. Or nowadays they don't have to print the article; they just upload it onto the system. Now, the thing that a lot of people actually don't do is that when it comes to writing successful, publishing successful writing, you have to go through a series of edits and proofreads. Now, that's the most difficult part. The most difficult part is not necessarily writing the review article or an essay. The most difficult part is what to do afterwards. Yeah. So once you've basically written an article or a review or book, what you then basically do is you sit down and you edit. Yeah. And you re-edit and you re-edit and you re-edit and you should go through a series of, say, for example, 3 or 4 edits before you send off the final copy. Now the thing is that if you visit art galleries or museums, and you find like the notebooks of, say, for example, famous authors, you'll basically find that the initial manuscript that they basically wrote the book on, or the first manuscript or the second manuscript, it's scribbled. There's lines going through, there's annotations on the side, etc. So it's a established practice to actually go through several edits before the article is finalized. So that's really important, of knowing how to edit, how to re-edit, and going through several editions of proofreading. Now, there's 2 ways people can do the edits and writing. So the first way is when you basically start off with an end in mind. So when you basically sit down and you say, okay, so this is the book that I've just reviewed, and now this is the structure of my argument. It's going to take 5 points that I'm trying to kind of convey, and the introduction, I'm going to mention this, and in the conclusion, I'm going to mention that, and the main body of my text is going to kind of have these 5 or 3 or 4 central points of argument. So that's one way. A lot of people can actually do that. Sit down and think, and to be able to to write the review down. So that's the first way. I personally, what I tend to do is I do a what's known as, I tend to kind of recast my argument. So I'll sit down and I'll write the review. Yeah. As I'm writing the review, I'm trying to kind of formulate the arguments and the ideas as I'm going along. So as I'm writing, I'm trying to kind of think the ideas actually through. Once I've actually done that, then the second stage will require editing and re-editing, and then by the time I've actually got to the 4th draft or the 5th draft, then my arguments will be much more coherent then. So I don't necessarily start off with an end in mind, but rather it actually evolves through a series of internal debates and internal kind of discussions. So that's something, just another way of actually bearing things in mind. I mean, I'll just mention this. I mean, obviously, as a sociologist, I'm really interested in the classical sociology. So if you pick up, say, for example, famous text by Karl Marx, Das Kapital, this famous 4-volume summary of his critique of capitalism, if you like. Now, there's a book that was just basically recently published by the Marxist historian David Harvey, called The Gunreaser. Now, The Gunreaser isn't a book. It's Karl Marx's notes. It's Karl Marx's notes on the Das Kapital. And it's interesting to see how he's basically, as he's basically reading around, he's trying to make sense of capitalism and economics, and his ideas are actually developing as he's basically writing his his notes. So it's interesting to see how various intellectuals do their writing and do their do their thinking, if you like. So that's the fourth point. The fourth point is, it's important to edit, to read, to re-edit, and proof, and to bear in mind that you can either start off with a review in mind, the end product, or the end product can actually actually evolve as and when you're actually going through that journey. Okay, I mean, I don't know how long I've been talking. I hope I've not been talking so too long. The fifth point. The fifth point is not to take rejection to heart. Now, a lot of times when someone basically does a review, they send it off and they say no, and you think that okay, so this is a personal kind of insult. Maybe I'm not necessarily worthy of writing. Maybe I don't necessarily have the relevant skill sets. There may be something's actually wrong with me. Now, a lot of the time, reviews and articles actually get rejected. Is because it's not necessarily to do with the your the grammar or the syntax or your ability to actually write. It might be because the argument, the central argument that you're trying to kind of articulate, might not necessarily fit the overall objective of the journal, because each journal and newspapers have their own intellectual positions, and what they basically want is their intellectual positions being reflected back in the reviews that you're basically doing, or somehow pushing the boundaries so that intellectual position that they have can actually grow as well. But if it's a review or an article that basically is antithesis to the objectives of the journal, then they might not necessarily have it published. So it's important to don't take rejections to heart. If someone basically says no, then always find another outlet to actually have things published. And if someone basically says, look, I'm really sorry, we can't actually publish your your review or the article, then you can actually say, look, if it's a journal that's been peer reviewed, then the chances are that they would have sent it to two peer reviewers, and they would have actually given some feedback. Get those feedbacks on board, yeah, and then rework the the actual argument, the article. So it's important for to take constructive feedback on board, because through the constructive feedback, you have the ability to grow. I mean, I know several well-established academics that get their book reviews rejected. I know even more fully fledged academics that basically have their journal articles rejected. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to pack the bags up and go home. I mean, you just basically you work through criticisms, and it makes you grow as it makes you grow as an individual. So that's the fifth point.